I loved Roald Dahl's books as a kid. We all did. His books include such classics as Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, George's Marvelous Medicine, The Magic Finger, and my personal favourite, The Twits. And one of the things that we loved about these books is that they had this very dark and cynical nature to them, particularly the endings, which would usually conclude in a way that was dark but at the same time had a lot of closure. Now, he of course had other books that were definitely not classics, such as The Giraffe, the Pelly and Me, and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, but there was one that completely crossed my radar: The Witches. Now strangely, I had never heard of this book as a kid, and I didn't even know that there was a movie adaptation of it made in the 90s, and something I can't help but wonder is, if I really enjoyed 2 of his book to movie adaptations when I was a kid, would this have been the 3rd book to film adaptation that I would have really enjoyed? Well, now that Warner Brothers has released a new version of The Witches, it's time to find out if this is a story that I would have liked all this time, and we'll also see which of the 2 movies is superior. Let the battle commence. Now, right from the beginning of the 90s movie, the way the story unfolds and just the tone it establishes is very effective. You can just feel that something is not right, and this fully immerses you into Roald Dahl's twisted world. And almost immediately, we are taken to a scene where a grandmother tells her grandson Luke a story about a witch who kidnapped and killed a little girl. And the way she describes the witches and how much they despise children and how they try to kill them, it's dark stuff that would genuinely frighten children who are watching this film. Especially when you find out where little Erica ended up. Her father watches in shock as he notices that his little girl is locked away in a painting. And to make things even creepier, Erica's position in the picture keeps changing, and if that wasn't enough, as the years go by, her image gets older and older until one day she becomes an old woman and then she suddenly disappears, presumably dying of old age. That is a creepy and horrible fate, and the way the grandma describes the story, she describes it very calmly, and the music that accompanies the tale is also very subtle and quiet too. And the way they're able to make the scene full of atmosphere and still have an unsettling and creepy edge to it, it's very impressive. Usually stories like this have to be told in scary voices and with scary music, but this doesn't do that. It tells a story in a very quiet and subtle way, and she still comes off as a loving grandmother, not some old lady that forgot to take her medication. And in general, I really like the relationship between Luke and his grandmother. It's very sweet and feels like something that's taken right out of Roald Dahl's books. And even though I haven't read this particular book, I have read many of his others, and all the trademarks of his material is being conveyed very well in this film. Now in the new version, the grandma is played by Octavia Spencer, and she is a really great actress, but I thought she was miscast in this role. She just seemed too young to play his grandmother, and as a result, she doesn't have that nice and warm voice and presence that grandparents usually have in movies, and their scenes just didn't feel as heartwarming as the scenes in the original film. And it certainly doesn't help that this movie is constantly being narrated by Chris Rock, who sounds like he's telling a story in one of his stand-up comedy events. I'm not kidding, his narrations feel completely off tone with what we are seeing in the actual movie.
The bald-head honcho who was standing right above me, the one who was giving all the orders, as soon as I got a good look at her, I knew instantly who she had to be.
And overall, their relationship just doesn't hold a candle to the relationship between the 2 characters in the first film. It just didn't feel as genuine. It felt passable at best. Even when she gives him his present, it didn't feel anywhere near as nice as it did in the original. Now they do show a longer passage of time where Luke grieves over the death of his parents, which I liked, but in all honesty, it didn't really add anything of substance to the overall story. And his grandmother tries a lot of different ways to make him feel better, and one of them is this. Yeah, if someone did this to me when I was feeling grumpy, then I would walk up to them and do this. Additionally, the new version also has a story where the grandma tells Luke about a girl being kidnapped by a witch, and instead of being trapped in a portrait where she lives the rest of her life in cold, isolated entrapment, she just turns into a chicken. Yeah, this didn't feel anywhere near as scary as a girl being trapped forever alone in a portrait and staying there until she grows old and dies. This was just stupid and honestly came across as comedic, and the grandmother doesn't seem panicked or disturbed when she's telling this story.
I got so scared I tore out of there like greased lightning and hightailed it straight home.
Also, the conversational exchanges between the 2 versions of these characters, well, take a listen for yourselves.
Witches spend their time plotting to kill children, stalking the wretched child like a hunter stalks a bird in the forest.
Do they hunt you? You said it was an accident.
A very unpleasant accident.
Now, you see this here cough of mine? It was likely brought on by a witch. Probably that one you saw in the grocery store.
Really? A witch can make you cough.
This is basically my point. One you can take more seriously, whereas the other feels almost like a parody, and you can't take this style of mythic storytelling seriously, whereas when this grandma tells you the story, you can. And keep in mind that I am only showing you small snippets of dialogue. If you listen to it within the context of the movie, you will really feel even more how tonally off the grandmother's storytelling is in this new film.
Pure, unvarnished evil. That's what witches are.
There is just a very campy execution in the delivery of her dialogue and the explanation as to how the witches work. It's not ominous and creepy like it is in the original movie, and it really kills the atmosphere and tension of the story. And it's not helped by Chris Rock's comedic narrations. So Octavia Spencer really is a great actress, but this is the first movie that I have seen her in where I feel she was miscast. She doesn't tell the story with any nuance or reverence. She's just telling it in a way which is very flat and completely off with regards to tone. She sounds like she's having a completely normal and casual conversation, and the way she continues to tell the story in this fashion, you just can't get invested in it. She is supposed to be telling a scary story, but instead it just comes off as silly, and this serves as a horrible introduction to this world and the witches that live in it. It doesn't fill you with chills like the original movie did when that grandmother told you the story very quietly and seriously. Also, setting the movie in a black neighborhood was also a mistake, because right from the offset, it changes the movie's atmosphere and it just feels off. This setting and neighborhood feels absolutely nothing like a world that was created by Roald Dahl, and that would be fine for a different type of movie that is more grounded in reality, but for a movie that is supposed to be transporting you to a world that is fantastical and unusual, grounding it to a more down-to-earth location just feels like a misguided decision at telling this story. The original movie didn't do this, and it maintained the strangeness of Roald Dahl's world, and it gave the movie this slightly bizarre feel and energy, but you don't get that with the new version. And as for the kids that play Luke, in the new movie I don't think he was miscast, but unlike the original film, he doesn't have much personality, and when he turns into a mouse, his character is completely different all of a sudden, and he does not come across as the same kid that he was before the transformation, and the dynamic he has with his grandmother is not nearly as effective, so consequentially the back and forth they have with each other doesn't work as well. For example, when Luke was asking questions about the witches in the original movie, it felt like genuine child curiosity, but in here, it sounds so scripted, and half the time, it doesn't even sound like he believes her or takes what she says seriously, even though at this point when she's telling him the stories, he's already seen a witch, so he should believe everything she's telling him at this point. And whereas the relationship between the grandmother and grandson felt very heartwarming in the original, it just felt weak, stiff, and sometimes awkward here, and that, again, is not helped by the constant comedic narration by Chris Rock. So the movie, with the superior telling of the story, as well as the superior interpretations of the characters, is the original movie. Now before we talk about the Grand High Witch, let's first talk about Luke's first encounter with a witch. Now in the original movie, I thought the way the witch deviously tried to talk to Luke was bloody genius. The way she's trying to trick the kid into coming down so she can kill him is so chillingly real. She offers him a gift, and when that didn't work, she offered him some chocolate. That is some real devious and predatory shit. And as well as working with the plot of the movie, it is teaching kids a valuable lesson of how you should not accept gifts from strangers. And this witch is being very smart in how she is trying to get him to come down.
Hello, young man. What a magnificent treehouse. Did you build it yourself?
My dad and I did.
I've got something for you here. Something I think you'll like. Jump down and I'll show you.
No.
What?
No, thank you very much.
It's worth a lot of money. Here, it's yours. What's your name?
Now in comparison, just look at how the witch in the remake talks to him.
Boy. Boy. Do you like sweet? She is tasty. Very sweet.
Okay, I have a lot of things to say about this one scene. First of all, the kid is right in front of her. He isn't up a freaking tree, so she doesn't have to offer him a sweet to have him walk towards her. He's by himself in the corner of a shop. If she wants to kidnap him, then she can easily take him right now, just like the witch took Erica in the original movie. Secondly, if she wants to trick the kid into thinking that she's being friendly with him, then she has royally screwed up, because the kid is clearly petrified. Is that her idea of winning the kid over? And thirdly, I don't know what this actress was trying to do here, because this performance was just embarrassing, and it made me drop my jaw it was that bad. I asked my sister to see if it was just me, and even she started shaking her head when I brought up this scene. I have seen actors make choices where you just can't comprehend what the hell they were thinking, but this definitely makes the top of the list. So Luke's first encounter with the witch was done far better in the original movie, and it perfectly established just how devious and dangerous these witches are to children. And now it's time to talk about the Grand High Witch. Now, Anjelica Huston was an enemy to all of us kids when it came to her movies, and whatever negative reaction the filmmakers wanted her to evoke from us kids, she usually does it. So you take one look at Anjelica Huston, and to the kids who are watching, she is a natural at these villainous roles. And then you look at Anne Hathaway, and well, she is not a natural villain to children, is she? As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, I remember Anne Hathaway always being the innocent character, and I remember her being the victim most of the time. What I basically mean is that aside from Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises, Anne Hathaway just doesn't feel like a natural fit to be a villain for children to hate. She just doesn't, and it really shows when you see her perform as the witch. Now, her performance had moments of greatness, but honestly, throughout the movie when she's playing the villain, I just didn't buy it. And when you don't buy it, you just see the actor performing, and you just lose the immersion and are completely taken out of the film. Whereas Anjelica Huston was just a natural at being the villain from beginning to end, and completely embodies the role. Anne Hathaway just comes off as miscast. And I haven't even talked about the makeup effects yet when they go full witch face. Now I'm going to show you the reveals of the witches for both of these movies. We'll start with the reveal in the original film.
You may remove your wigs. Help.
Just look at that load of practical effects. This was done by Jim Henson's workshop, and they are renowned for doing amazing animatronic work. And these effects, although a little rusty around the edges, they still look amazing and downright disgusting. And the look of her minions are also quite gross too. So, now that you've seen the reveal of the Grand High Witch and her minions in the original movie, let's take a look at the reveal in the new movie that was made 30 years later. Surely it should look even better than this, right? You tell me which one you think is more impressive.
You may remove your remains.
Oh, and don't forget about that great narration to really set in the horror of what you just saw.
My blood ran cold as I started to get real scared. Here I was, trapped in a room with a bunch of bald-headed witches.
Really puts the fear into you, doesn't it? It's not like it takes you out of the movie at all. I mean, come on, seriously, 30 years later and this is what we get. The only thing she does is have an elongated mouth, which doesn't even look scary because it looks so fake. At least with practical effects, even if you can tell they look fake, they still look disgusting and repulsive. This just looks like cheap, unfinished CGI. It looks horrendous in a different way. I mean, Anjelica Huston clearly had to wear these prosthetics that I can't even comprehend how uncomfortable they were.
It was an uncomfortable makeup. I was in that particular mask for about 3 weeks, and I had extensions on my hands, so I couldn't go to the bathroom, I couldn't do anything without aid.
So as you heard, as it always is with prosthetics, it took a lot of work and a lot of patience to keep something like that on. And I can't commend Anjelica Huston enough for allowing the filmmakers all the time they needed to film her performance in this for 3 weeks. Anne Hathaway, on the other hand, didn't have to do anything. It was all done with CGI and a bald cap. It just looks so lazy and uninspired, and the crappy CGI honestly makes it look like a cartoon in many scenes, and she doesn't look anywhere near as repulsive as she should. Even when she's floating, she looks fake. The effect should be as simple as lifting her with some wires, but instead they use CG for some reason, and she has that artificially clean look over her skin that you can only achieve with poor and unfinished CGI. And it makes this whole movie seem like one big cartoon. It actually sickens me that this movie was going to go into theaters. If you were to go off of the visuals, this seems seems more like a direct-to-streaming movie, and it took a pandemic for the studio to come to their senses. And Anne Hathaway's witch is also quite pathetic. She gets had 3 times in 1 minute. That pretty much takes the intimidation factor away when a character does that. And when she kills one of our own witches for questioning her, it was paced very well and made sense in the original movie, and it had a good build-up to it. In the new version, it just happens out of nowhere, just so they could do it for a lame joke. One that was done far better in Shrek 4.
Your Excellency, do you have a plan? How can we possibly wipe out every
That was actually a good question, insubordinate, but a good question.
Maybe we could hire a professional bounty hunter? What a world! What a world!
You know, actually not a bad idea.
Now surprisingly, I don't think Anne Hathaway's performance in here was bad. I think it could work. But the thing is, Anjelica Huston always had a look about her, and you could immediately see her playing these darker and mysterious characters. It was something she brought to her performance so effortlessly. But Anne Hathaway doesn't have that look about her, so she tries to put it on, and it's not nearly as convincing. And her over-the-top performance, at first I didn't like it, but the more I thought about it, I realized that that wasn't the problem. The problem is that she doesn't go through a drastic visual transformation. I feel like if she had some full-on visual transformation like Anjelica Huston did, then her wacky performance would have worked, as the exaggerated look of the witch would go hand in hand with the exaggerated performance. But as it is, she had the exaggerated performance, but she did not have the exaggerated look. And as a direct result, that balance just wasn't there. And when you see Anne Hathaway's real face when she's supposed to be at her, for the lack of a better word, witchiest, it just comes off as laughably over the top and stupid. And that's ultimately what I think is the biggest failing with her version of the witch. If Anjelica Huston was acting like an over-the-top witch with her normal look, then it also would have seemed quite silly. But they save her really over-the-top scenes for when she's in the exaggerated makeup and prosthetics. And it perfectly combines with the exaggerated performance. They both go hand in hand with each other. And that's why her performance, as over-the-top as it is, works so well. But unfortunately, the same can't be said for Anne Hathaway's version of the witch. The performance is there, but the look is not. And you need both of those elements to really sell this witch. But as is, her witch doesn't even seem as threatening and doesn't even have half the cruelty that Anjelica Huston's version had. And all of those elements and more is ultimately why Anne Hathaway's version of the witch is far inferior. The one new thing that they brought to her version of the witch that I liked was when she stretches her arms out. That I thought was really cool and creative and creepy, but that's about where the creativity stops with this movie for me. So the movie with the superior witch and special effects is the 90s movie. Now let me preference this by saying that these movies don't scare me, obviously, but I can see if it would scare kids, and the original would scare kids with its grisly visuals and nightmare fuel, but I don't see how the new version would scare kids. Maybe very little kids, but Anne Hathaway's look as the Grand High Witch, I don't think it's enough to scare them, but Anjelica Huston's version did scare children, and her interpretation is still praised today, and the climax is exactly the kind of chaotic craziness that you would expect from the end of a Roald Dahl book. It's crazy, it's satisfying, and the makeup work for the witches transforming into mice, again, is absolutely amazing. And the chaotic and crazy imagery looks exactly like something you would expect from a Roald Dahl book. It really does leap off the page. And I like how there is blood on the meat cleaver, showing that the witches are being absolutely massacred. In comparison, the way they start turning into mice in the 2020 movie, it's all done with horrible looking CGI, and they all fly around in the exact same direction, and there is no variation in the way that they do it. And it just doesn't feel satisfying at all to see these witches get it. In the original movie, on the other hand, I had a huge smile on my face the whole time, and the look on the Grand High Witch's face when she sees her minions turning into mice is priceless. Also, a quick mention of the side characters like Stanley Tucci, who plays the hotel manager Mr. Stringer. Now, he's a great actor, as we all know, and surprisingly, he had even less to do in this movie when compared to the original film. They completely remove his subplot, and I'm guessing that they did that because, you guessed it, the Me Too movement. Now, in the original movie, he is played by Mr. Bean himself, Rowan Atkinson, and he was a fun side character, and he definitely felt more involved than Stanley Tucci's version, and he also had more personality. And yeah, I think he was far superior to his 2020 counterpart. He's the one that killed the Grand High Witch in the end, and in the new movie, it was her fake-looking CGI cat. He didn't do anything, except get bitten in the nuts by one of the mice, and the inclusion of a third female mouse. Again, I don't know if it was in the book, but she also felt like a pointless addition. Especially when both Luke and Bruno accomplished the same mission perfectly fine in the original movie, I felt like the female mouse was just a third wheel, and she came completely out of nowhere. There's just no sense of danger or stakes in this movie. In the original, they establish how dangerous and frightening these witches are to children, and you buy it when the grandmother tells you the stories, and when you see one of the witches try to lure Luke down from his tree so she can give him a present when really she wants to kill him. It's downright creepy. He even calls out for his grandma a bunch of times, and that startles her at first, until she realizes that his grandmother isn't coming, and she taunts him about it. But the witches just seem like a lesser threat in this movie, as they don't establish the scary nature of them properly. Everything just comes off as a parody of the witches' story rather than a genuine retelling of it. I mean, even when the witches aren't around, there is one scene where Luke gets his tail cut off with a butcher knife, but they even cut that from this movie. The original was just so much ballsier. It had so much more personality, and it felt more creative. Oh, and before I forget, the scene where the witches find out that Luke was with them, that whole chase scene was quite intense. So much so that I was actually on the edge of my seat a little. I really didn't expect that. The scene is massively stripped down in the 2020 movie though, and it doesn't even come close to the scene from the original. Anjelica Huston definitely goes over the top with her performance at times to the point that it's funny, but there are other times where it's downright creepy, and it's an absolute blast to watch. She even does things that are downright despicable and that you would not expect to see in a kids movie, such as attempting to kill a baby. That genuinely surprised me, but again, we didn't get that kind of cruelty in the new movie, because, like I said, there is no real sense of stakes or danger in this film. It's time for the scores. The 1990 Witches movie gets a 7 out of 10, and the 2020 Witches movie gets a 2. Do yourself and your kids a favor and watch the original Witches movie this Halloween. Stay as far away from this one as possible. I literally forgot about this movie pretty much straight after I watched it. It is that forgettable. As a matter of fact, one way you immediately know that they did not just do a bad job, but a terrible job with the new version, is that as soon as I finished watching it, I actually felt like I wanted to go back and watch the original movie again. And I had already watched the original right before I saw the new one, so the fact that I wanted to return to it so quickly speaks volumes of how much they messed up the new film. And this is coming from someone who has no nostalgic connection to the original. This just proves that as much as I always hoped for it, kids' horror movies just don't happen anymore. Back in the day, we got stuff like The Nightmare Before Christmas, Jumanji, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Gremlins, Indiana Jones 1 and 2, Monster House, Coraline, and even more. But now, we don't get films like that anymore. And if Robert Zemeckis, with producing assistance from Guillermo del frickin' Toro, can't give it to us, then I think it's just not going to happen. So we can only enjoy the older family horror movies, as we sure as hell aren't gonna get any new ones. Surprisingly, Shazam is the only exception. Now the 90s movie isn't perfect either. The effects, despite how impressive they are a little rusty around the edges, and the movie does feel a little dated at times with its presentation. Also, I did look into the ending of the book, and let's just say that both of these movies don't do justice to the book's original ending. And I think the ending is a sour point for both of these movies, to be perfectly honest with you. The original plays it too safe, and that's really a result of unhappy test audiences, and the new movie changes the ending and just makes it stupid and overly happy. Whereas in the book's ending, let me tell ya, it is anything but. In the book, Luke and his grandma return home after the witches are all killed by the hotel staff, and they come up with a plan to rid the world of witches by using the Grand High Witch's potion to turn the rest of them into mice so their cats can kill them. Whilst they come up with this plan, Luke learns that mice can probably live only another 9 years or so, and decides that in the end, both he and his grandmother will die together. That is both very dark and tragic at the same time, and it's kind of a depressingly haunting note to end on, and I think that would have been a ballsy ending, but both of these movies go with a more traditional Hollywood ending, and Roald Dahl didn't like it the first time, and I bet he's rolling in his grave now that they've done it again. So in the end, Roald Dahl delivers a great story, and although Hollywood did a great job the first time, the remake could have been so much more, but instead, it was just a complete waste of time. Apologies for the delay in videos, guys. I got multiple copyright claims with my previous video that I was going to upload about 2 to 3 weeks ago, but despite me contacting the studio about it, the claims did not get removed. I'll just upload it regardless very soon so you guys can see it. I have other videos on the way too. I'm getting even closer to finishing my series of unfortunate events binge watch video, and I also have another couple of Versus videos planned and on the way, so stay tuned as I am working on other videos. And don't forget to head on over to my Patreon and join us as I review each and every episode of The Mandalorian Season 2 as they come out. And all it will cost you is just $1 to gain access to all of those podcasts and more. Thanks as always for watching another one of my videos, guys. I always appreciate it. Please give it a thumbs up as it really does help in getting my channel noticed, and I will see all of you next time. Take care.